Hello there, people. I finished a book, A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This book was written in 1722, and just a little bit about the book. It is a novel, technically, but in the introduction, they say that this is actually a pretty good, one of the best accounts of the plague that hit London. This is the bubonic plague in 1665. It lasted for about a year, and according to this, towards the end, much like COVID, people were still getting sick, but more and more of them were recovering until so many were recovering that people kind of lost their fear of the plague. But at its height, there was a hell of a lot of people dying every week. They had to dig big pits, and yes, they have carts that go around with a guy saying, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead," like we've all seen in Monty Python's Holy Grail. And there is even a little story in here about a guy who's not quite dead, but finds himself on the dead cart. Daniel Defoe, and of course, he's the guy that wrote Robinson Crusoe. I have not read that, and this is my first Defoe, 1722. This copy was published in 2001. It's 186 pages. So Defoe is alive and living in London at the time of this plague, but he's only 5 years old, so he couldn't possibly have remembered all of this. So he had to have done some research to write this. 1665 in London, and we go right to, there's a little bit of reading I'm going to do here, so hopefully I don't mispronounce too much stuff. Page 31, the nurse keepers. If any nurse, this is a series of laws that they enacted after the plague became very apparent, and it became apparent that they had to do something about it. If any nurse keeper shall remove herself out of any infected house before 28 days after the decease of any person dying of the infection, the house to which the said nurse keeper doth so remove herself shall be shut up until the said 28 days be expired. And why did I mark that? Because of the 28 Days Later movie. That's probably where they, I'm guessing that people overseas, a much higher percentage of them have read this book than people in the continental United States. So whoever the producers or the writers of the movie 28 Days Later, that's probably where they got this. Third paragraph, page 48, the pits. It was reported by way of scandal upon the barriers that if any corpse was delivered to them decently wound up, as we called it then, in a winding sheet tied over the head and feet, which some did, and which was generally of good linen, I say it was reported that the barriers were so wicked as to strip them in the cart and carry them quite naked to the ground. But I cannot easily credit anything so vile among Christians, and at a time so filled with terrors as that was. I can only relate it and leave it undetermined. Third paragraph, page 69. That's a long paragraph. From hence they passed along and took in other dead bodies, till, as honest John Hayward told me, they almost buried him alive in the cart. Yet all this while he slept soundly. At length the cart came to the place where the bodies were to be thrown into the ground, which, as I do remember, was at Mount Mill. And as the cart usually stopped some time before they were ready to shoot out the melancholy load they had in it, as soon as the cart stopped, the fellow awaked and struggled a little to get his head out from among the dead bodies, when, raising himself up in the cart, he called out, "Hey, where am I?" This frighted the fellow that attended about the work, but after some pause, John Hayward, recovering himself, said, "Lord bless us, there's somebody in the cart not quite dead." So another called to him and said, "Who are you?" The fellow answered, "I am the poor piper. Where am I?" "Where are you?" said Hayward. "Why, you are in the dead cart, and we are going to bury you." "But I ain't dead, though, am I?" says the piper, which made them laugh a little, though, as John said, they were heartily frightened at first, so they helped the poor fellow down, and he went about his business. And, of course, we all remember the scene in Monty Python, where there's somebody in the dead cart, not quite dead, and they knock him on the head and kill him. 76, second paragraph. The inhabitants of the villagers, this is about people that, you know, all during the plague, people were trying to get out of London. And even when the plague was raging. And sometimes they waited a little bit too long and they would already be sick. The inhabitants of the villages adjacent would, in pity, carry them food and set it at a distance, that they might fetch it if they were able. And sometimes they were not able, and the next time they went they should find the poor wretches lie dead and the food untouched. The number of these miserable objects were many, and I know so many that perished thus, and so exactly where, that I believe I could go to the very place and dig their bones up still. For the country people would go and dig a hole at a distance from them, and then with long poles and hooks at the end of them, drag the bodies into these pits, and then throw the earth in from as far as they could cast it to cover them, taking notice how the wind blew, and some coming on that side which the seamen called to windward, that the scent of the bodies might blow from them. And thus great numbers went out of the world, who were never known, or any account of them taken, as well with the bills of mortality as without. Throughout the book, he stresses that the official numbers given of the dead are way undercounted. It's supposed to be 68,000 that died out of a population of 400,000. And he says that the population was not only much higher, but the dead was at least double that. Last paragraph, page 77. And indeed, the work of removing the dead bodies by carts was now grown so very odious and dangerous that it was complained of that the bearers did not take care to clear such houses where all the inhabitants were dead, but that sometimes the bodies lay several days unburied, till the neighboring families were offended with the stench, and consequently infected. And this neglect of the officers was such that the church wardens and constables were summoned to look after it, and even the justices of the hamlets were obliged to venture their lives among them to quicken and encourage them, for innumerable of the bearers died of this distemper. Infected by the bodies, they were obliged to come so near. And had it not been that the number of poor people who wanted employment and wanted bread, as I have said before, was so great that necessity drove them to undertake anything and venture anything, they would never have found people to be employed. And then the bodies of the dead would have lain above ground and have perished and rotted in a dreadful manner. Third paragraph, page 153, and I'm remembering now I was supposed to Google something and I didn't do it. 153, 123. My friend, Dr. Heath, was of opinion that it might be known by the smell of their breath. He's talking about how can you tell who's infected? But then, as he said, who durst smell to that breath for his information, since to know it he must draw the stench of the plague up into his own brain in order to distinguish the smell. I have heard it was the opinion of others that it might be distinguished by the parties breathing upon a piece of glass, where, the breath condensing, there might living creatures be seen by a microscope, of strange, monstrous, and frightful shapes, such as dragons, snakes, serpents, and devils, horrible to behold. But this I very much question the truth of, and we had no microscopes at the time, as I remember, to make the experiment with. And what I was going to Google was like when did microscopes become widely available? I'm sure they were invented by that time. You know, they were probably pretty primitive, but probably also not widely available. Bottom of 160, top of 161. All through this book, I was thinking, weren't the English at war with the Dutch at this time? And didn't the Dutch actually sail up the Thames and burn part of the English fleet? And that's a good one to try Googling because, fuck, man, Google does not understand. But I was right. It's in the year 1666, I believe, that it happened. As to foreign trade, there needs little to be said. The trading nations of Europe were all afraid of us. No port of France or Holland or Spain or Italy would admit our troops or correspond with us. Indeed, we stood on ill terms with the Dutch and were in a furious war with them. But though in a bad condition to fight abroad, who had such dreadful enemies to struggle with at home? Yeah, it was a furious war. They had a battle that went on for 3 days out in the Channel, and for good measure, the Dutch actually sailed up the Thames and burned some English ships. And that's kind of like the British burning the White House in the War of 1812. You don't really ever see anything about it because our nation and their nation are probably embarrassed by that fact. I'm reading another book, which so far is kind of absurd, but it's not long, so I'll be done pretty soon. Thank you for watching.